Good morning and welcome to Tech Trends 2020. We are delighted to have Richard M. Marshall here with us this morning. Richard is a well-known analyst working with the Analyst Syndicate. He's former Gartner. He's a CTO, he's a non-executive director, and he's a very well-known writer and speaker. So without further ado, I will hand over. We'll be delighted to take questions. Please use the Q&A function and we will take them at the end. Richard, very welcome.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Jane. Well, first of all, I guess we should be saying I hope that everybody is well out there, given the current times. And it's obviously not the best of times for a lot of people, but it's very interesting times. So let's come back and talk about that. So this is a specific edition of Tech Trends, talking about the impact on industry and business. It is not going to be covering viral stuff. I'm not going to be talking about pandemics. I'm not going to be talking about using mobile phones to track where infection has gone. I'm not going to try to talk about vaccines or any of that, because I don't feel that that's in my competency. I could certainly talk about tracking, but not the moral aspects of it and for how we're doing it. Nor am I going to talk about the economic impacts and speculate about what could happen about that. What I'm specifically going to be looking at is how we as technology businesses can face up to this and help our customers and other people through it and to thrive as we go forward. So that's really the sort of main topic from my point of view. So it's all fun based on a concept, building a framework to help us understand and a framework to navigate through these interesting times that we're in. So I started off looking at Bertolt Brecht, who said, first food, then morals, back in Threepenny Opera, which is a wonderful piece of theater. And interestingly, in the original German, he doesn't use the word food. It's actually a word feeding in the way that animals eat. So it's basically about, we have to put in place stuff that enables us to survive before we can then come up to more important moral questions. And that's really part of the foundation of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll come back to that point in more detail. But I'm going to move on into living in interesting times. And I was just going to start off by saying that a lot of people say this is a Chinese curse. Turns out that there's absolutely no evidence for may you live in interesting times being a curse of any kind. And it seems to be attributed to Chamberlain in 1936 in a newspaper article of all bizarre things. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. That's just a kind of interesting piece of background, but it's good to know that back in the dark days of the 1930s, they were using the same kind of thoughts that we're having to have now about how do we survive and how do we get through this. And fast forward to 1987, the US military created a framework to help them understand complex, rapidly evolving situations. And they came up with something called the VUCA index, so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So these are things that we are all facing at the moment. Stuff is changing very, very quickly. We certainly do not know when things are going to be certain again, when things are going to unwind. We don't know what's going to happen next. It's a very complicated situation. There are many, many factors involved, not just in the pandemic itself, of course, but in existing through it. And there's a huge amount of ambiguity because there are many different paths that we can go down. There's a lot of fake news, of course, going around. There's a lot of contradictory things, so that we need some framework to help us look through that. So if you look at VUCA, you'll find a lot of academic and military strategic research around how best to operate in complex, evolving times. And interestingly, there's a general thing called a VUCA index, which is assessed on each country. And needless to say, that complexity figure is going through the roof at the moment. We have a lot of very complex ambiguity out there, and therefore that index is being bloated out of the way. Now, strategy under uncertainty is yet another piece of management research about it. So a guy called Hugh Courtney and his team in 1997 were writing in HBR about 4 levels, which is not supposed to have the arrow on top of it. The arrow is supposed to come up afterwards. So do that. There we go. So most of us were sitting in a situation where there was a clear enough future. We had a reasonably good idea of what we're going to be doing next and where we're going for maybe the next year, a couple of years, depending on who you are. Or we might have had a degree of uncertainty with other factors out there, which I'm not going to raise, but you all know what I'm talking about. And some alternate views of the future, level 2 uncertainty, and then maybe there was many of them for a lot of people. And then finally, true uncertainty, where we can't even predict what's out there. So what's actually happened now is that we've had a shock, which has bumped us directly from level 1 to level 4 without going through those 4 stages. And normally, any kind of planned event, as I say, normally, will go from 1 level up to level 2, level 3, and then on to level 4, so that you know what's happening, that you're aware that things are changing, and that enables you to be more prepared and to actually have some, again, navigational framework to help you through that uncertainty. And this shock is probably the best way of describing what's happened, because it is unprecedented impact on a lot of people. So how do we, as businesses, as people, navigate through this? And I've been talking about eyes down and eyes up. And one of the things that I came up with was a framework about how should we be thinking. And it's a 3-stage process. And I'm pleased to see that quite a lot of businesses are looking at this kind of 3-stage thing, which is how do we survive? So that's the immediate front end of the process. How do we continue existing? And after that, we need to start thinking about how do you restart? So where does the business go after this? Or indeed personally? Are there new opportunities to be explored? Do we take the chance to restructure ourselves? Do we change our business? Do some of the things that we did to survive become our permanent business? How do we look at these stages? Now, it's very difficult when things are falling apart to think about those next stages, but it's really important to keep 1 or 2 brain cells sitting at the back, or 1 or 2 people if you're a big company, looking at how do we restart? What do we do when everything returns to something that is vaguely like what used to be normal? When travel starts again, when we can start moving, when clients free up budgets and the like. And how do we accelerate into those times? How do we accelerate out of the bad position that we all find ourselves in now? And how do we prosper with that? And it's very important. How do we use this time to take advantage? Now, this is actually a key element of the trends. So normally when I'm doing a tech trends presentation, I'm talking about stuff that are long-term, slow-moving trends. And what's happening at the moment is those trends are accelerating like crazy. Some of them are completely stopped, but the key ones are really, really important to get to that prosper level. How do we take the opportunity? How do we come out of where we are today with very strong businesses, stronger, and take advantage of technology? So I could be talking about huge numbers of subjects in here, but in order to keep us within a reasonable amount of time and stop you all falling asleep, I've picked 4 things that I want to talk about, which is work, digital transformation, events, and people. All topics that are very close to my heart and areas where I've been doing a lot of research over the years and working with clients on. So I'm going to delve into work to begin with. And I was highly amused when I was preparing these slides. I found this piece of clip art of an empty office, and I noticed there's a wine bottle sitting beside a couple of the screens there. So if you look closely at your screens, you will see a wine bottle as well as an empty office. That was not intentional. Anyway, I want to look at work because I've been working from home for 15 years or so, and worked from home before that. And I even had a cupboard set up, which was great in winter because you could just climb into the cupboard, close the door, and it was lovely and warm. So I'm really very, very used to working from home. So it hasn't been a big shock for me, but millions of people have suddenly been thrown from working in offices out. Now, one of the things that I think that we need to look at is the history of where offices and work comes from. So if we go back in time, the office and the factory are artifacts of the Industrial Revolution. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, people worked from home. So a smith would be making horseshoes or nails, and they would be working in their forge and they'd sell the individual items. as they were made. And then as we built offices, big structures, people were moved into them, partially because the equipment was there, but also because it enabled employers to watch over you. And if you look at sort of typical Scrooge kind of pictures, you will see the counting house with the person sitting on the podium, supervising all of the people scribbling away in the ledger. So in many ways, the office is, in the history of humankind, quite a recent thing. So there is history that we can go back to, but for all of us alive, we've had, as long as we're aware of, and our parents' generations, we've been working in offices, and being moved out of the office is a bit of a shock for many people. So that shock aspect is really quite important. So again, I was looking for a framework around this. So the framework that worked best for me was based on a Maslow hierarchy, which is like the extended version of that Brecht quote about first feeding. So if we're looking at a Maslow hierarchy of needs, if you're not familiar with it, the needs at the bottom of the pyramid, the big ones, are things that you have to satisfy before you get up the top. Now, there's a few people who've pointed out that you can still have ethical concerns while being hungry, but the principle of Maslow is really helpful. It enables you to identify how you move up and improve what you're doing. So the basic point of this hierarchy is connectivity and devices. If you're working from home and your broadband isn't working, or you can't get your computer to connect, or whatever it happens to be, and the word VPN comes to mind, and things like that that are quite difficult to get set up and difficult to configure, and cause issues with users. And I've been doing a lot of technical support for my wife's friends and yoga groups around using Zoom and other such things, and I'm sure you've all been doing that in the same situation. Connectivity and devices is fundamental layer that enables us to do all the rest of the working from home. So if you, in terms of survival mode, you have to get all that stuff right. Once all that's working, you can start worrying about the next level up. And the next level up is, how do you do meetings? How do you do process? What are your rituals? How does your job work in this different world? So it's really interesting. You might be used to standing up, wandering over to somebody and asking them a question. And one of the key things that you learn from fully distributed companies like GitLab, for example, GitLab doesn't have any offices anywhere and has developed over years a number of very strong documents. They've released some very good material that talks about fully distributed companies and how do you do that. And one of their key points is transparency. So when you can no longer wander across the room to ask somebody what the third parameter for that function is, you have to document it, and transparency is really important and central issues for it. Other things very important is check-ins. So you may have people who are struggling or unfamiliar with it. Managerial people need to check in. You can do stand-ups. It's interesting that a lot of people already got tired of having the sort of virtual drinks at the end of the working day or stuff like that. So you need to figure out what works best for you, and whether that's for functional processes, things that you do because it's part of your job, or whether it's a social thing or a communication thing. You need to work out what those rituals are, what works best. Stand up. One of the clients I'm working with does a Monday lunchtime stand up with everybody where the chief exec talks through what's happening. Other clients that I'm working with have got one-to-one meetings that they set up every day with the staff in a schedule, so that the managerial staff are talking to somebody at least once a week, if not more. And the tech teams within that organization are having one-to-one marketing, having stand-ups, marketing teams having stand-ups as well. And above that, of course, and in the world of IT, unfortunately, the hacker and scammer community are not going away. So we do need to worry about security. So the fundamentals of security really do have to remain in there. But a very important aspect of that is education. And I'm probably going to drive any CIOs or CISOs out there listening to me absolutely mad during this presentation, because one of the things I think is really important is that it's more important to get people working and educated into not taking the risk and not doing stupid things than it is to try and lock stuff down. Locking stuff down will just reduce productivity and make people unhappy. So there, I've upset all the security people, but I will come back and talk about trust and training a lot in the rest of it. So once we've got these three basic elements of the pyramid in place, so we've got figured out how to use Zoom, and our email's all working, and we can connect on the broadband, and it's working reasonably well. We can then move on to how do we work better and start reinventing work and looking at work. What are the processes? And this is where a lot of technology can come in. There's a lot of cool tools out there. I'll talk about them in a moment. A lot of interesting ways of changing how you work, making the work better, increasing transparency is talking about. So the idea of documenting everything. So maybe you need to look at things like wikis or communication structures like that, shared whiteboards. There's lots of tools out there, but there's also processes that just become sloppy and inefficient because it's easy to turn around and talk to somebody, or it's nice to walk the other side of the office. When you can't do that, you may well change that. And part of that will feed up into the next level up, which is, I'm calling is self-service. So as part of this process, we're going to uncover a lot of sharp edges, things that don't work very well, things that we're not able to get to, services that are locked up. Perhaps they could be something running on an IBM iSeries machine, mainframe, green screen kind of applications that were never opened up to the network. And suddenly you find you can't do your job because you can't get to network. Or there may be some bits and pieces in there that you would normally do on pieces of paper and hand them in. Requisition orders, who knows? All that kind of stuff needs to move onto the internet, intranet, whatever you want to connect to it with, in order to enable remote working. And this is going to be a massive driver for digital transformation, topic which I'll talk about later. And it's also going to drive the way we use tools to build those things differently. And then at the apex of this hierarchy of needs comes something very, very important, which is self-care. Because many people who are working from home are not used to working from home. They miss the social aspect of it. There's nobody to catch if they're being suffering, if they're having depression, or if they have issues of any kind. So that once we've built that self-care solution, make sure that everybody's working properly and able to do their job, we need to ensure that they are well, that they are being looked after, and that anybody's got cries for help. So they're all sorts of things you can do in there. I'll talk about some of them later, but one example is it just keeping a chat window open all the time if you're in a position of responsibility, or having a Zoom room sitting there that people can drop in, equivalent of a manager having an open door. But there's also things that use the self-service and richer working levels and rituals that enable us to ensure that people are looked after. That is a really fundamentally important aspect of this. So I hope that this pyramid gives you a way of thinking about, once we've got over that basic things, what do we do next in order to create a flow? There is an unbelievable outpouring of how to work from home stuff. I've been posting what I'm calling pro tips every day for the last couple of weeks. So I've been contributing that deluge. There's an awful lot of very basic stuff out there. But once you get past that basic stuff, you really need a framework in which you can start looking up the way. So I think that this uncovers an awful lot of interesting trends as we go up. And one of those trends I mentioned that's accelerating is the growth of consumerization. So most people will be familiar with bring your own device, where it really grew out of having a better phone or a better laptop for yourself than the one that the company gave you, which was kind of slow and gray and didn't do very much. Enterprise solutions never quite live up to the excitement and buzz of consumer solutions. So I believe that we're going to see a very strong trend where people working from home and trying to get their jobs done, and I really believe that most people want to work and do their job properly, they're going to start using all of these different tools out there. Well, maybe not all of these, because many of them overlap, but they will use overlapping ones. And it's important. It doesn't matter if you use Dropbox, Box, Zoom, and Uber Conference. Maybe you use Blue Jeans and WhatsApp. And any CISOs listening again, people are using WhatsApp out there. So it's really important not to try and constrain people in what they're using, but let people find the thing that works best for them, but educate people, provide easy to understand, simple explanations of how you should use stuff, not let secrets escape, use things that are safe and reliable. Don't go posting Instagram pictures of your Zoom meeting with all of the user identities of your cabinet minister, for example. That's a good security step. Educate people on this rather than lock it down, because if you lock it down, people will just go underground and use something that's insecure, and that increases the risk. So massive mega trend is going to be bring your own app, which has been around for a while, but this is really going to drive it, because when you're at home, you have different requirements for what you're doing, and those tools will become fundamental to the whole nature of remote work, which is changing the way we operate. And as I say, I've been working from home forever, so I'm sort of painfully familiar with some of the issues that people come across. But one of the biggest elements is trust. We are seeing a shift in trust. Now, there's quite a lot of solutions out there that spy on workers, and I think that's a truly bad idea. A lot of people out there are applications that will turn on cameras, take screenshots, track keys, and they don't want people sitting there looking at Tumblr all day or skimming through people on Tinder or whatever it is that they're doing when they should be working. This is an extremely negative approach to it, and it is going to drive trust down so that people will find other ways of skiving off. And it's really important to start building trust that works in both directions. And recruiting difficult skills is heavily dependent on having a good employer brand. And this is an opportunity for companies to show their true colors. And we can all name ones that have showed how nasty and dark they are and how they really don't care about their staff. On the other hand, there's a lot of companies out there that are demonstrating just how much they do care about their staff. And you can guarantee that when this whole crisis is over, people are going to go and work for the ones that they trust, not the ones that are laying people off left, right, and center and not paying. The other aspect of trust is colleagues. So if you're used to sitting beside somebody, and go back to this thing of just asking the person next to you, you can't do that anymore. So what we have to do is put in place a lot of mechanisms and technologies from that set of collaboration tools that enables us to see that stuff is being done. I was interested to see that this cartoon appeared in the New Yorker earlier this week, which picks up on this managerial anxiety. The wall of screens in the background letting people seeing the manager see that their staff is working away. This is so Scrooge-like. It's so like the person sitting on the stool on the podium looking out across the counting house. And this, I repeat, is a really bad idea. So for those who are suffering from what we could call this productivity anxiety, I go back to old working ways. This lady is a Harris Tweed weaver, like all the Harris Tweed weavers. She works from home, and she gets paid by the length of fabric that she knits in a day. So if you're worried that your people aren't doing anything, don't bug them, don't try and monitor what they're doing, don't take screenshots to see if they're looking at porn or whatever. Actually just measure the outputs. And if there is no output being produced, then you need to figure out what's happening. They may be struggling, they may need help, or they may just be skiving off because you're an untrusting person that they don't feel that it's worth working for, in which case all of these things need to get fixed. But measuring output is something that was a trend that was happening anyway. This is another one of these key trends. If we look at outsourcing contracts, a lot of them are looking away from how much does it cost, how many hours or how many days or how many weeks of work is it, through to what's the value. So we should be looking at what's the value of the home workers. Are they providing that home value, work value from home, and measuring that and tracking that and checking that it's not going off the scale. Very important. And it's a convenient mechanism as well, because this trend is happening anyway. So here's an opportunity to grow into new ways of measuring things. So at the end of talking about work, here's some concrete actions that I think are really important for us during this time. The first one is checking in on people. As a managerial responsibility, you should probably be checking in with your staff regularly. Obviously in an office, you can walk around and bug people, or you can, if you're working remotely, I've been used to doing weekly or bi-weekly phone calls with everybody on my teams over the years. And you can always pick up on people who are struggling from that. So it's a good discipline to get into. Check in on people. It's really important to know that they are comfortable, that they've got everything that they need, and that they're not in distress. Next thing is being flexible, because this is time of big change. Back to that uncertainty factor. The uncertainty is applies to everybody, and it could equally well apply to the fact that somebody's got a small child crawling over their desk, and as they're worried about their partner's loss of job, or all sorts of things. So be flexible. If people aren't being as productive as normal, then I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing. They may be having technology issues, they may have family issues. Just be considerate and think about that employer branding and how important that's going to be once we come out of it. And addressing both of those points is this concept here, the continuous education. You hear me talking about education a lot here, because I think that's fundamentally important. And I don't talk about that kind of typical strangulated HR speak that big companies specialize in. I'm talking about informal human communication. So I know one company where the chief exec is recording daily videos from their house, very personal, very much, I'm talking to you. This isn't a formal communication. This is not all written in consultant speak. This is me. I'm living through this. I'm really worried about it. And I know you're in difficult positions. This kind of internal communication is really important, works with clients as well, and it needs to be going on all the time. This is not something that should be set up and made complicated. It needs something that you can address. It's about reach. It's about ensuring people feel engaged and involved, because engagement is a fundamental part of obviously how people work for you. The other thing is try stuff out, adopt new rituals and tools. Old dogs, new tricks, work out how to do things better. Try stuff. If it doesn't work, let's adopt an agile approach to it. Let's say fail fast. Let's try using, I don't know, let's pick Trello. Trello is a fabulous tool for managing ideas and content and progress and managing it, but it's not for everybody. So let's try Trello. Let's see how it works. Let's try shared whiteboards, all sorts of things. Let's try online planning tools. And part of that process is about building this trust. Now, I'm a big believer in psychologically safe spaces where people should have the confidence to be able to open up and say, I don't know how to do this, or I need help, or I'm unsure about how we're going to get through this, or whatever it happens to be. And this really needs to come from the top all the way down. So every business should have psychological safe spaces. People should be free to stand up and say, I don't think this is going to work, or I think we should do this better, or I don't agree with that, or we're heading for trouble, whatever it happens to be. This is the basis of survival, and people should feel that they will not suffer any recriminations and that their management is open for it. So this needs to come from the top, and it's very important. And this is one of the key elements that will will live on beyond this current crisis. It's not about remote working. It's about changing the way that companies are organized. Small companies typically much better at this than big ones. Big companies tend to disappear into hierarchy. So this is an opportunity to flatten that out and to get people working better together. And finally, of course, we're going to, I was just talking about measuring output, not hours. This idea of measuring value, understanding the value of contributions, rather than just clocking in and clocking out. This is an incredibly important step towards future value and future ways of looking at how things work. So I'm going to move on now to talk about digital transformation, which is a topic that I'm sure all of you have heard about numerous times. And indeed, one of the biggest issues with it is that it's difficult to know what it is. A lot of the time, digital transformation is a kind of a vague concept, which probably leads to the fact that 70% of last year's projects didn't reach their goals, and an estimate of $900 billion wasted last year. $900 billion wasted. Think how much that would do for the Scottish economy. So it's really important for us, that's obviously a global figure. It's really important for us to be able to understand exactly what digital transformation is. And one of the beauties of this current crisis, if we can draw a positive for something so bad, is that it gives us huge priority around survival. What do we actually have to do, and not vanity projects? And one of the things I truly love is that I have the good fortune to live in central Edinburgh, and I can get all sorts of stuff delivered to my door now. So the cake on the left came in from Nice Times Bakery for my wife's birthday that fell during lockdown. Absolutely fantastic, delivered to the door. And they did that through Instagram, email, and PayPal. It was as simple as that. So they were posting, we have these cakes, anybody want to buy them on Instagram? You DM them, yes, I'd like that. And you then DM them your email address. They send you an email with an invoice from PayPal, and then you pay it. The top right, some of the best bread I've ever tasted from a company called 12 Triangles. 12 Triangles have a bakery and coffee shops, and they were obviously closing down, and they were encouraged to open up an e-commerce site. In fact, it's really interesting because they built one e-commerce site, scrapped it, and built another one. And all of these companies have been reviewing their business models, as have a lot of fitness providers. Bottom right hand is one of my Parker trainers who is currently furloughed and is delivering courses for us for free in order to keep us all moving. So these businesses have been reinventing themselves because they have to. Now, how do we continue that into stodgy areas? How do we do this, for example, at government level? Now, this is an example from one of the companies I work with. This is the Romanian government's portal for people to deposit documents formally to request support during the current crisis. So similar to the business grants that we have here. They launched this portal in 4 days using a low-code development tool, coupled with a couple of other technologies that enable secure, unmodifiable versions of documents upload, so that there's a full audit trail there. This company is also working with some of the NHS companies to put the current invoicing onto blockchain so that they can do audits later. So that at the moment, the principle, of course, in any health service is get the equipment you need and we'll sort out the finance later, but that creates opportunities for fraud. So having an unmutable blockchain-based track of all the spend so that we can put the auditors on it later is actually a really fundamentally intelligent thing to do. And this tool lets them build stuff very quickly, prototype it and change it. Similarly, in Dubai, they have been putting in place very severe lockdown conditions, and you actually have to fill in a permit request online. And this was built very, very quickly using a low-code tool and rolled out to the entire population. So both of these tools are fully scalable, fully secured, because they're obvious targets for fraud. They've been built using low-code tools very, very quickly so that they match the needs, traditional constraints of development, but they don't rely on traditional slow development methods. I put together here a list of some of the things that I think that are trends that are really important in this delivery. And I sincerely believe in low code. I've been using low code tools. I've built some in the past. Get away from coding everything unless it absolutely has to be done at the bottom level. Move to low code so you can deliver stuff quickly. Microservices, fantastic opportunity to break things down and make stuff reusable so that as we come into that restart and prosper mode, the modules that we have in the background are suddenly available for doing new stuff. APIs enable us to plug stuff together, and it's really that this is not a new trend, but the use of APIs to create an API economy, sharing and working together. And I go back to all those bakeries and coffee shops, they're all sharing stuff. So the Edinburgh Butter Company, for example, sells butter through one of the bakeries that was initially one of their customers, and they now distribute it to bakeries customers because they had customer facing activity. APIs will enable our businesses to work together and build an economy much beyond where we are today. This enables like-minded companies to integrate effectively. Cloud's interesting because, of course, scaling up and easy access to the internet will enable those self-service capabilities to be deployed very easily and scalably. And of course, containers is a big part of that. So these are all things that we were doing anyway. And now we have an amazing imperative to drive the adoption of these things. Super important. Take a deep breath, move away from how we've built software in the past, enable the digital transformation, and use the current crisis as a prioritization mechanism. So concrete actions, again, from this section, from how do we make the most out of digital transformation. Review your business models. It's really important. Go back to coffee shops because I think they've done a really cool job at survival. They could have just shut down and claimed their furlough money, but they don't want to do that. They want to keep us in good bread, and they want to keep our customers so that when we do restart, they can accelerate out into a new business. Some of them may never go back to having physical premises. They may only do e-commerce. Really interesting to take this opportunity to review stuff. And this is how that e-commerce model is accelerating like crazy. Key priority services, you'll find that there's things that you can't do, fix them. And best way of fixing them is adopting new tools. So again, be agile with a little a, even if you're not agile with a capital A. So be more flexible about how you do stuff, adopt new tools, don't worry too much. If it doesn't look right, who cares? If the e-commerce site or internal service is a little bit shonky looking and a bit squint and doesn't look very nice and doesn't correspond to brand, who cares as long as it keeps the business going? And again, bring back security. Educate rather than mandate. This is the way to do it. And put tools in place again. So another area that is deeply, deeply, profoundly affected, obviously, by the whole incident at the moment is events. So I've done a lot of events, and this is me speaking at a Gartner event a few years back, AEDI London, and I was asking myself, why do we attend events, or more accurately, why did we attend events? So I was looking through, now what's the purpose of events? And the reason I'm drilling into this is because I think it's a helpful method for understanding how we can do things going forwards. So event has this set of purposes. You go there to learn. You go to discover new things, new methods, new products. You go there to decide sometimes. Maybe people go to events to decide what equipment to buy, what supplier to work with. You got to have meetings because the main thing about trade shows is all of your suppliers and all of your competitors and all of your partners are present in the same place, so that it was easy to meet. So a lot of people, big companies especially, go to trade shows to actually sign contracts. That's not something that needs to be done there. But a lot of people end up talking about the schmoozing. We go there because our friends are there and we can get to go and have a beer with them. Now, what I would say is, how do we replace each of these? And this is, again, how do we find trends? How do we identify key trends as we go through this? What is the virtual replacement for each of them? So for learning, video services, PDFs, webinars, whatever mechanism it is, there are ways of delivering this stuff at distance. And they've been around for a long time, but a lot of people have stuck with classroom activities. How do we discover new products? Well, better web searches, better web information. How do we put our product information out there so that it's easier for people to make decisions? Don't make things mysterious. Don't make things come and talk to us. Put the information out there. Decision support tools can help you decide stuff. There's lots of online ones out there that enable you to make proper decisions. So again, I would expect that we will see a lot of people moving their purchasing processes online and away from the human elements of it. That's not to say the human decisions don't matter, but this is about decision support. Video conferences, obviously, we're all doing loads of Zoom conferences. It's funny how that's become part of the common parlance, and the way that Googling things has become that. I would expect us to see, I'm going to Zoom you this afternoon, will become common thing. So meetings can move online. So, okay, so you're going to have a meeting because you're all in the same place. Well, you're not in the same place. Signing stuff, lots of e-signature stuff out there. So I would expect that's another technology that's been kind of bumping along out there for a while and very slowly being adopted. I would expect that's going to become a massively bigger signature. And frankly, if schmoozing is the only reason you're going to events, I'm not signing off your travel budget anytime soon. But what's missing? Why do people still go to events when we can do all of that? And I do think that virtualization stuff's important. But what is actually missing is buzz. A lot of the video conferencing and a lot of the meeting techniques and even the webinars like this, they lack buzz. When you're setting up an event with physical people coming in, you have music, you have lights, staging, you can have interesting pre-rolls on the screen, you can do lots of stuff, whereas Zoom, wait while we open for the meeting, is like not terribly helpful. So I think this is an amazing opportunity for companies to come out and disrupt. So people who are looking at this, digital companies out there, if you've got great ideas for disrupting the event space, now is the time to do it. I think there's an amazing opportunity to go out there to resuscitate what's effectively a dead industry at the moment. How do we make this more exciting? How do we make events more exciting? So one of the things I'm involved in is the Edinburgh Science Festival, and we're currently running a set of digital properties, virtual festival, to try and keep the brand out there, keep people engaged, give kids stuck at home something to look at. And great use of video content, great use of archival content. How can we extend this out to the rest of the industry? So big shout out to everybody in the event industry. Get your thinking caps on. How do you disrupt yourselves and come up with something stronger? So concrete actions coming out of looking at events: move static parts to video. Offer better product information, because it's sometimes really difficult to find stuff. Make pricing more transparent. Any kind of discussions, commercial ones, are just going to have to move to video, and people can learn. And again, I'm going back to my learning and education point. Seek out education to help people read body language at distance. It is possible. Establish that trust. Digital signatures should be being adopted anyway. Here's a huge new impetus for that. Anybody in that business, make sure that you're being heavily promoted around there. Again, explore new products, go out there, look at different ways of dealing with events, use different products, and above all, don't be boring. Make things fun, make things colorful, get away from gray, boring presentations. So I'm going to move on to people. Again, this is a slightly weird photograph. It's actually a person handing their CV over to somebody interviewing them. It looks a bit weird, cut off. Talking of boring, trying not to be boring here. People are really important. People are far more important than technology, and hopefully everybody's aware of that. So we are in a position today when most people are thinking in terms of people around layoffs and furloughs, and most of us didn't even know what furlough meant until a few weeks back, and pay cuts, and how can we survive through there, not to mention actually contracting the disease itself, which is thoroughly unpleasant. This is a bad time, but this is a time when we need to start looking at things in a different light. This is where we need to turn that into the positive. So how do we respond to that. So what should our immediate responses be? Communication. Again, I was talking earlier about that informal thing, but it works both ways. Don't just have the chief exec posting little videos about how he or she is feeling, but get in everybody doing it. People at the front line, people who are furloughed, people who are at home because they're immunosuppressed. Get those people talking about how they are, get them communicating, showing that it is a common problem, and create community, create that sense of togetherness through the ability to post it. I mean, social media is full of this kind of stuff. Bring it within your business, create a framework or some forum where people can go out and express what they're doing, positive and negative, saying what their thoughts are. Support through them. I've talked a lot about one-to-ones, but you can also provide a lot of background areas, and I'll talk about some ideas in a minute about how you can do that. Education, and you need to prepare for the future. Education, if somebody's furloughed, this is a great opportunity for them to learn new skills. What do you think your business is going to be doing at that restart and prosper phase? Can we get our staff to do something? They're bored if they're sitting at home. Use this time to go out. There's lots of e-learning. Lots of companies have made their e-learning packages free. Even when they haven't made them free, it is worth investing in your staff and paying people to adopt these learning classes. I've seen a lot of people posting on LinkedIn, I've just finished this, I've just finished that. I think that is a fantastic opportunity. Now, a lot of people are not in the mental position where they can do that. So you need to be aware that somebody who may be a little bit stressed and traumatized is not going to be a good candidate for learning. So you need to be, again, flexible and agile about it. And you need to prepare to make sure that everybody can come back in. So this is an example of a portal from a company. It's been built by a product called 5app, who I work with. This is live content. I took this morning, this screenshot. This is a training company that delivered mainly classroom training, and they have moved all of their content online, and a lot of their in-classroom trainers are there for furloughed, but they have built this internal site where there are people coming in with good news and people saying how they're feeling, and anybody can post on this, and it's really interesting. And it also enables people to find the content really, really quickly. Positive communication, people being able to express themselves. And this is a company that has created a lot of confident vulnerability amongst their staff, and this really does come down from their chief exec. Another aspect is doing surveys. This is an example of a company called Hive. I made up the survey. It's not a real survey, but I do know companies that are doing this. So asking people, not the usual once a year, what do you think of the company kind of thing, asking people, how are they? And a lot of oblique questions can help you identify whether people are feeling bad, whether they've got appropriate workstations in terms of what their desk's like. Are they comfortable? Are they managing to cope? And the dashboard element is super important because you can start to see trends. So if you do this survey, change the question slightly, get people to answer it, and don't make them too long, don't make them too fiddly, don't make them too corporate. Ensure that people are asking those questions, answering them regularly, and it means that you can spot people who are struggling, and it also can identify easier ways of doing stuff, which can then be fed back into that communication track. Concrete actions for people. You need to plan for that restart. What does that restart look like? Envisage what your company is going to be like once the restrictions are lifted and we can get people back working. How do we accelerate into prosperity from here? That could well mean being ready to upscale rapidly. Now, that means two things. One is that you're going to bring back your furloughed staff. So furloughed staff are probably frustrated, bored. Keep them in touch. Keep talking to them, engage with them, send them information, get them to do things within the limits of whatever the law allows for. Let them self-educate. There was an interesting comparison to maternity leave, so that when somebody goes on maternity leave, their job is retained, but those people need to be kept in touch with so that when they come back, that they can rapidly become productive again, should they choose to return from their maternity. That is a great example to think about it. It's a practice that's out there. It's another trend, again, that is going to be very, very important to bring people back. Think about, how do you bring your teams back? How do you restart your teams? Maybe this is the opportunity to restructure the way you do stuff. And part of that restructuring may be that you need new talent to match those new business models. Maybe these people are moving on into e-commerce, need to start bringing on more e-commerce skills. Maybe they need to shift the weight take the bakery example, maybe they're shifting the weight from front of house to back of house. That can apply to almost any business, no matter what you're doing. But at all times, remember your employer brand. It's really important to help those who are left behind. It's not their fault that they may no longer be relevant in a new business. And you really need to be very conscious about that. And that is a very important element for your prosperity. So moving forwards, we need to think about resilience. Resilience is a very, very key element, and many people don't have a lot of resilience. And culturally, a lot of us have moved into a position where we assumed that there's a positive future, and that being ready for disaster was kind of weird way of looking at it. And extracting value rather than retaining resilience has been kind of a mantra around the whole shareholder value thing. But there was a great quote that Winston Churchill didn't say, but if you look in the interwebs, you'll find lots of people saying that never waste a good crisis, is Winston Churchill. He did not say this, but a lot of other people say it, and one of the current US politicians is saying it. So never waste a good crisis. What can we get out of this? What can we learn for? And it's really important to have your brain split in half at this point, or possibly in quarters. Survive, restart, prosper. Those are the phases that we have to go through. And keeping part of your brain, part of your awareness ready for that prosper is really difficult, but really important. So how do we do this? Learn, discover, invent. These are the three things that I think we have to be doing, and supporting individuals within the organization, learning what works, discovering, trying new things, being brave, fail fast, really important, and investing new solutions. This is an opportunity for us to grow. Any crisis is an opportunity to grow once we get over that survival phase. So be ready to accelerate. Many of the changes we're looking at the moment will be permanent. So don't think about these things as temporary. It's okay to put up 80% solutions, but they will become permanent, so that any technical debt there will need to be fixed at some point. Changes in process will not snap back to where things were. I sincerely believe that there's going to be massive change. Remote working is going to be a major factor going forwards, and that changes just so much. And while we're doing this, it's important not to learn just what we changed, but how we changed it and why we changed it, so that we build up corporate memories about how we responded to this. How did we come out? Who were the heroes? Who were the people who figured out how to keep us in business? How did we keep going? We need to keep people going with that. Always think digital to the forefront. I think in Scotland, we're in a strong position for that, stronger than some other places, but definitely the right way to go is go into digital solution where possible, identify new things. We need to build surge capacity into our systems, so that if there's another shock, we have to worry about that, but turn on that existing surge capacity. And cloud is a fantastic opportunity for that. So the ability to scale things up rapidly is really important. And the last word here really is that we have to be ready for more crises, because this is not the last crisis. This one has been a big shock. It was sudden, but there's some coming along. And I like this cartoon because it points out that we are facing as a planet a lot of very, very major challenges as we go forwards. So let us take the resilience that we are building and the responses that we are building in these three phases of survive, restart, and prosper, and learn from that how we can address climate change and indeed any other pandemics that come along, because this isn't the only coronavirus. So let us build a resilient country, resilient business, and personal resilience. So at that point, I'm going to stop and hand it over to Q&A.
Richard, thank you so much. I'm almost speechless. I found that hugely interesting, hugely informative. And I'm definitely going to be taking some of the messages forward on that, not least the survive, restart, prosper mantra that I think will help us get through. We've got a couple of questions in. If I can pose those to you. The first one is, should we become more like the civil society and be driven by outputs and outcomes, or should we have a blend?
I'm a big fan of outcomes. I think outcomes are amazingly important. However, the only counterpoint of that is that you can't always actually measure the outcomes. And so I think civic society is a really good idea. I'm deeply worried about, anybody who's seen my previous presentations all know I'm deeply worried about inequality for all sorts of opportunity, all sorts of reasons. And people not being given the opportunity is a big part of that. So the ability to measure an outcome is dependent on our ability to define what those outcomes are, and that's not going to be easy. So I feel I'm kind of touching on multiple threads here, but the idea of everybody being valued by their worth and their contribution is really important. And here's an opportunity to stand back and look at that. And it is an opportunity to assess things in different ways and get away from presentism, I think is the term, which is about people turning up. Do you think that answered the question, Jane?
I do. No, I definitely do. There's another one in from Ian Ritchie. Hello, Ian. Should we worry about security when people are using their home computer? Kids might be online gaming on the same machine. It might be unprotected on the internet. Are there any obvious checks that people should do?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for joining us. And security is always something to be worried about. I'm going to upset all the security people out there again, and I think that security is often overstated. The most common problem is loss of data through the loss of devices, and a lot of the stuff's at the back end. And the biggest issue around sharing is that people will accidentally drop content or make content visible to somebody else or create a vulnerability. Now, the other side of this is that the vast majority of us don't have anything of value. And it's really important to separate out things like personally identifiable information that could be considered a target. But it's probably a good idea to separate work stuff from play stuff, but that doesn't necessarily have to be on separate computers. It could be different workspaces, different logins, and I would go to discipline. It's about making sure you shut down anything that might still be running. So screen cameras and stuff like that could be shut down. But while there is an awful lot of activity out there, it's mainly directed at data centers and online services or into things like phishing attacks. So again, educate. The only thing that you can really do against phishing attacks is educate people so that they can recognize it when it comes in. I do know that there's quite a few organizations have been hit by waves of phishing attacks which disguise themselves as remote working activities. So we've just launched a portal, sign in here as a password phishing thing. So I don't know, Ian, if that answered the question, but I think that discipline, education, and then far down sort of lockdown approaches.
That sounds really sensible.
Just one thing I was going to add there is that if you're in a regulatory industry like banking or insurance, then there's or medical, obviously, then that's a slightly different position. And then I think that there is more justification for locking things in. But, you know, being careful, wash your hands before using your computer.
I think that's very good advice. We've got some more questions coming in. We've got one from Ewan Robertson. Hello, Ewan. So far, what have you seen as the positive and negative ways that people and organizations have responded?
Well, I think there's a human aspect, and I think we should definitely name and shame the organizations. So Wetherspoon's refusing to pay their suppliers, for example, is just utterly unacceptable socially. On the other hand, there's people like Brewdog, sticking with beer, who are using employee surveys. And I think that there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening out there around organizations that are helping people be productive and ensuring that they are well. So the positive stories I like are the ones where people are rolling out as I say, the employee surveys, the people who are opening up, where the human aspect is coming out there, taking the opportunity to change things. And I just love the Central Edinburgh cake community, the fitness community, all out there. And I think they're great examples of agility, small organizations that have really bitten the bullet because they have to. And I think that we can learn, bigger organizations can learn from that. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is just quite how many of the outpourings that we've seen about how do we work from home, how do we survive this, are genuinely not trying to sell product. They are genuinely trying to be helpful. Don't always achieve that. And perhaps the most useful output of the whole thing is that finally people are going to stop worrying about what they wear when they're working.
I wonder how many of us have been doing calls with our pajamas still on.
Only in the
On the
lower
remote.
half.
There's, I'm not even going there. There's we have more questions coming through. Actually, on the remote working one, from Kevin Davidson, remote working should become the norm, but with core hours from say 9:30 to 1 p.m., allowing staff to work the remaining daily hours to suit their individual lifestyles. How do you think this may work in practice?
I'm a huge believer in that. And it's, again, very interesting. If you go back to GitLab, and they have a whole paper about this, and it talks about it because it's not just about physical distribution when you're not working in an office. It's also about time zones. And the key element that is enabled by remote working is that you can get the best person no matter where they are. And somebody may choose to be a digital nomad or some cheesy expression like that. Or they may be, it may turn out that the best developer for blockchain happens to live in, I don't know, let's say Bucharest, or, someone is in Serbia, and they don't want to move because they like being there. So you are now able to hire that person because you're working in a completely distributed manner. So I do believe the core hours really helps. I think core hours of availability are important. But there's even ways around that, because let's face it, we all have Slack and Teams and all the other tools installed in our phones. So you could be sitting having dinner and getting messages if you want to. The other thing that I think is really interesting to look at is how the notion of working from home, especially for people who have small children or school-age kids who are at home, is that maybe you work in the morning and work in the evening. And so one morning you could be working with one part of the world, and in the evening you could be working with another one to match up time zones. So I personally believe very strongly that we will see a model in the future where there are concept of community office. There are certain things that are going to be easier to do in big spaces, either coming together with other people or using stuff like enormous screens that are just physically too expensive, too energy consumptive, and too big to fit into most people's houses. So you will have small hub offices that are a little bit like a WeWork common area, distributed about the place, and that most office buildings will end up being converted into something else, retaining a few common areas. And that's going to have an enormous impact on value of property and the whole assessment of what capital and wealth means going forwards. But that's a topic for another one. So I think that I agree completely in the model you just described. So yeah, I think that more people are going to be adopting that as we go forwards. And I think it's going to be a really exciting time. And as people adjust, it's going to definitely be a better way of working.
I think that sounds very positive. I think we'll have to invite you back actually to do a follow-on webinar on that topic. It's
I'd love to do that, Jane. Thank you.
Heather, I hope you're taking note there. That's one we need to follow up on. Interesting one from Katie Guthrie, in fact. Hello, Katie. I think is another good question. In the event space, one of the things that's missing in the virtual world is that random element, starting to talk to the person next to you and finding a connection. Are you aware of any solutions that might help with that, or is that part of that challenge to companies to come up with something to disrupt?
I think you're spot on there, Katie. Interestingly enough, when I posted a written piece that I did about a month ago before, no, longer ago than that, I think it was when Mobile World Congress was cancelled. I wrote a piece about this is the end of events. And it was, funnily enough, my brother, who is also a techie, but an academic, he came back and immediately said, what about the random element? And I think you're absolutely spot on there. At present, I'm not aware of any kind of good solution for it. And I really do believe that there's an enormous opportunity to make that super exciting. Really, really challenging, and it'd be very easy to come up with concepts like, Tinder for event delegates. These delegates match your process. Now, I know that a lot of companies that run big conferences, so I'm thinking here of like Reed Exhibitions and their subsidiaries, have looked at kind of doing that sort of stuff. Even Mobile World Congress, you could register yourself with what you're interested in, and it would attempt to match you up with other delegates, but none of them really worked very well, partially because it was such an effort and it was too complicated. So this is maybe an opportunity for the Tinderization of delegates, so that you can swipe left, swipe right on the people who are there based on what their interests are. So I think go for it. I do believe this is a huge opportunity for it. The other thing, while I'm on that quickly, is one of the things that if you go to a theme park, like let's say you're going to Disneyland, and let's say you're going on to Tower of Terror, and it's a long wait, but the pre-show is absolutely amazing. And so you don't actually mind the wait time because there's so much to see and do as you're going through that. So it's that kind of educational buzz, not education, entertainment buzz that we have to look to. I think we can learn a lot from that. We can also learn a lot from casinos. Now, I'm not a fan of casinos, but casinos have perfected the art of creating entertainment out of time. So to take theme parks, take casinos, take how people run physical events, warm-up acts, whatever you want to do, and look at it from there. And I think that we actually have a very, very interesting opportunity. So yeah, love to hear from anybody who's come across anything like that. And would love to hear from people who are actually going into that disruption space.
I think that's a great call to action. Actually, we would love to follow up with that one with anybody that's on the session today. Let us know if you've got new solutions or new ideas that would fit with that model. We've got a few more questions, Richard, if you don't mind.
No,
I'm
fine.
going to go to one that came through chat first and now in Q&A, so I don't miss it. But from Derek Young, do you think measuring output rather than focusing on presenteeism will continue to be the metric increasingly used after coronavirus, even if we return to office work as a default?
I think that this is, as I said, it's a trend that existed and it's being accelerated. So my expectation is that the grumpy old men, and okay, so I'm a grumpy old man, I'm pale, male and stale. Well, I try not to be too stale. I can't help being male and pale. But anyway, I think that there's going to be a huge dead cat bounce, I guess is the expression, that there are going to be people who want to go back into the office. I've even seen somebody suggesting that we should cut off all remote access once we can do it. That's a terrible idea. So is it suddenly going to magically transform everything from now on? No, I don't believe that. But by 2025, maybe, I think we're going to see a massive transformation. The key elements for that is that you have to get people comfortable with it and have good metrics for that value. And that requires a bit of economic adjustment. So if you look at something like an outsourcing contract that's, say, let's cost £100,000 to build something, swapping that for value is kind of difficult to calculate at this point. So we need to figure out how to do that. So that's going to take a bit of time. So I expect to see a huge return in the very short term to presenteeism, and then that's going to bounce back. Everybody gets fed up with the commute. I think that commutes are going to kill work going forwards. They're going to, well, why the hell? When I was working from home, I didn't have to spend an hour in the tube for the people in London or whatever. You know, I'm not going to get stuck in the M8 going to Glasgow every day. That's a really bad use of my time. So I think that the evolution will accelerate. And I also think that there's going to be, going back to the topic that we need to talk about again, is this huge economic reasons for getting people to work from home and changing there. It's just a better thing for the economy, for carbon, for everything. So yes, I do believe output's going to get there, but it's not going to be instant.
Thank you. That's a really great answer. I think one of the threads going through everything that you've been talking about today is what we can learn from this and what we can take forward and how we can take the positive elements to change the way we do things for the better. We've got one in from Jackie Doyle that's actually picks up on that in a slightly different way. He's also said, great presentation and commentary.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate it.
How do you think the way we teach and attendance at schools will be affected or change because of this?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I come from a family of teachers. My father was a teacher, science teacher, who spent his whole career trying to get women into technology and science. He had some notable successes, which is always very proud. My older daughter is a primary school teacher who's currently homeschooling her kids because her kids are at home, and my brother's an academic. So I think there's a couple of really interesting things that we can learn from what's been happening, and it's an extension of an existing trend. If you look at a lot of universities, they are now recording their lectures and using lecture time for interaction. So you sit and watch the lecture on your own, but you still go into the lecture room and talk. And so it turns into Q&A sessions. So it's not just somebody standing up at the front mumbling about their slides. They can do all of that offline and, well, no, actually online, not in person. So I think that we can move to a model of teaching where the teachers get to do an awful lot more FaceTime directly with the pupils by offloading the sort of straight teach time. And for those of you like comedy, Foil Arms and Hog had a fabulous example of how not to do online teaching. If you want to look them up, quick shout out to a fabulous Dublin-based comedy trio who are very clean and very funny. So yeah, I think that this will profoundly change the way that education happens. It will also change the way that education is measured, although I don't think we know any of the answers there.
Thank you. I think that's really interesting. I can only speak. I've got three boys currently at home, with the schools being closed, and they are missing the interaction with friends at school, but they're actually enjoying a lot of the homeschooling elements as well. So maybe we will see a new model develop on the back of that too. We've got a couple of other questions I'd like to cover, if that's okay, Richard.
Yep, that's fine.
I'm in reverse order, I think, on these ones, but we've got an interesting one in from Brian Baglow. Hello, Brian. Do you see any opportunities for new structures like cooperatives where freelancers and smaller companies can collaborate to find new work and access companies they can't approach alone? I think that's an interesting one with the model you were talking about earlier as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is actually a perfect opportunity for it. And interestingly, I am part of such an effort, which is called the Analyst Syndicate. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And the Analyst Syndicate is a collection of independent industry analysts who are working together because individually we can't afford to have salespeople, but collectively we have some people selling for us and looking to build business models around it. So I think, again, this is part of a much bigger trend. The bigger trend is around moving away from recruitment being focused very heavily on filling a hole in an org chart, which is effectively what happens today, to hiring the right people into the team. And that hole in the team is very different shape to the hole in the org chart because it has different capabilities. It might be part-time. It might be a shared role with somebody else that they're bringing the skills from one project into another one. So I do think that this is a huge opportunity for people to get together. I was talking about all of the artisan food suppliers working together so that you can get your organic veg, your wonderful bread, your freshly churned butter, and your gorgeous cruffins delivered in one box by one company, but they all kind of work together to do it. And I think that the work model is like that. So it's an extension of the gig economy, but the problem with the gig economy is it's either a feast or a famine and it's very fragile. So by forming syndicates, I think we're going back in time. And if we look back into the guilds, back to that piecework stuff that I was talking about, that model really, really works. And I think we've got a lot to learn from there. And yes, on the online directories, I think Scotland is in a good position to help support those of us working in the IT community around there. Organizations like the Analyst Syndicate, we're in a relatively privileged position because we all have a lot of connections because almost all of us used to work for Gartner. And we're also, we've all got existing businesses, but together we're stronger. And I think that's a very strong mechanism. So I would love to hear from people who are putting together marketplaces, skills marketplaces. I mean, things like Upwork or Fiverr exist there, but they tend to be part of this whole thing about unskilled working, which really annoys me, is a lot of the people on something like Upwork or Fiverr are extremely skilled and very, very talented people. They're usually ridiculously cheap as well. So I think that we need to come together to those markets to help drive better value for people to understand it and to be able to engage in piecework and ensure that that piecework is managed better. So I think that's a resounding yes. So, let's get that community going. I think in Scotland, we have a real opportunity to do it and then to be able to flip that out at scale, because if we can get the model working here, we can then understand all the dynamics of it and then extend that to other countries.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer. And again, something positive that may come out of the changes that we're currently living through. There's two more questions. One's a more general one, actually links quite nicely to the final one. But do you think, from Jonathan Dobson, that businesses will now be more willing to adopt technology?
I think they have to, and it's really interesting. So an idea that I picked up from Ian Burgess, I don't know if you're in the call, Ian, but the notion of, I would describe it as lowering and raising thresholds. So a lot of the time, those of us who do live in the cities or nearby will say, oh, let's meet up for a cup of coffee. So even if you're working from home anyway, like I do, it's like I will occasionally go into the city centre to meet people for a sit in a coffee shop. Now, we could have done that on the phone. We could have done that over WhatsApp. We could have done that via Zoom. But we didn't. It was easier to walk up in many ways, but that is being reversed. So we can't go out and meet people. So I do think that we're going to see the adoption of technology, because you can't do it any other way, changing the thresholds that we go forwards. And a lot of my colleagues in the analyst syndicate are looking into the way that procurement will be changed. That most of it is due to budgets being slashed, but I think that's actually quite an American focus, because the way they're looking at things at the moment is retreat. I think that we're going to see that the way that you consume services is going to change, so that there's going to be a lot more SaaS type service with subscriber flexible business models that support that consumption, support the way you look at it, because the way that people adopt things is going to be driven by consumers. So you're using your own laptop at home, you can sign up to whatever service you want. The IT director isn't going to come and stomp on you or blue list your service out of use. Not thinking of anybody who can't currently get onto Zoom who might be on the call. Yeah, I think this is a fundamental change in the way that IT procurement happens, and is going to put the nail in an awful lot of the last dregs of what would we say, compliance, and the gray old way of doing IT. I think that's, that's going to burn out.
I like that answer. I like the subtle thread of disruption that's been running through the session. Just before I come to the last question, just to know, I should have said at the end of your previous answer that Brian Baglow, who asked the question about the freelance opportunities and the collaborative community one, has just launched a directory on the Scottish Games Network to try and prototype and kickstart that kind of initiative for the games sector. So maybe one to have a look at, and if anybody wants to get involved with that, contact Brian or contact us and we will pass on your details.
That's fabulous news.
Definitely. It's a really exciting initiative, I think. We've got another question through which is interesting too, and again a technology related one, from an anonymous attendee saying that they'd heard about a service called Sokoko. It's a sort of virtual office where you can talk to your colleagues around the room, with private rooms for meetings and even a break room. Seems to be the only one of its kind. Is that a potential solution for the current situation, or do you think VR might be an option, and do you think more of these will become available?
I think that's really interesting. I'd not heard of that, and I did spend some time raking around looking for it. So yes, incidentally, Zoom has breakout rooms, which were actually designed for schools and education content. Very few people seem to know about them. So you can break Teams down into it. So Teams does some of that, but the idea of actually creating something with break rooms and the ability to go and do it, it's about the purpose of that. I think that's really, really important. God, there was a second part of the question, and I forgot what it was that I was going to. It was
around whether VR.
Oh, VR! Thank you. Personally, I find it hard to believe that anybody is going to sit wearing VR headsets to do anything. I had the privilege to be at the Samsung launch, where Zuckerberg famously walked through the audience while everybody was wearing these headsets. So it was 4,000 people in an enormous hall. It was an amazing, spectacular, mega buzz event. And we all had these VR headsets on, and Zuckerberg walked literally through the middle of the audience, and nobody saw him because we all had these headsets on. But frankly, my experience of wearing the headsets as they currently are is such that I don't think it is a viable long-term thing to use all day. It's great for training. It's great for discovery. It's probably great for gaming. I'm not a gamer. But in terms of spending your whole day wearing those headsets, I don't think so. Interestingly enough, we watched the Ready Player One at the weekend again. And that's a very interesting view of how you might make headsets more, well, movie friendly for one thing, but headsets were there. And one of the things I have written down in the post-its I have on my desk of things to think about is, it says office overlay, and I'm not quite sure what that means, but this is the closest that I could come to for VR. And I was thinking, how do you make VR work in exactly the way that you're referring to there? And it's this idea of how do you overlay an office on top of what you're doing? It's like having a green screen in your office, so except it's not you that's against the green screen, it's what you're doing is against it. And the ability to drop in. So I don't think you do that with a headset, but I think that we will see that technology. I'm not aware of anybody doing any of it. One of my former colleagues at Gartner spends a lot of time looking at VR and work circumstances, and it's all to do with training. So yeah, open space, opportunity to take gaming technology and drive it into the enterprise. I think that one of the long-term things, and I've been looking at this trend since the 1990s, is that we see increasingly game-like stuff dropping into business applications, opportunities to learn from it, things like gamification and rewards and all that kind of stuff. Here's an opportunity to take the gaming experience at work, multiplayer gaming works extremely well, and convert that into how do you do it in an office one. And that's an amazing disruption opportunity.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point. Again, we've had a number of comments coming through on chat, mostly just saying, sorry, Brian's just said testify gamification. So you two probably need to talk about this one afterwards. But a number of comments just saying great presentation, and that people are in agreement that they believe this will be a driving force to reset what we're doing and allow smaller companies to work in a more nimble way to challenge some of the larger companies. I think your presentation, your talk today has been fantastic, hugely inspirational actually, and has given us a lot of things to think about, not least that I didn't realize Zoom had breakout rooms either. And having feeling like I've spent the last 12 years constantly on Zoom, I'm a bit surprised. I will have to go and look into that one. But huge thank you, because I think today some of the messages that I'm going to take away are around the looking for the positive changes we can make, the potential to innovate through disruption and to look at that in a new and positive way, to think more about trust and communication with people, to think about agility and how we respond to this, and to think about how we build the way forward in a slightly different way again. And I think your slide summed it up beautifully with the two hemispheres of the brain, with survive, restart, prosper, and learn, discover, invent. And I just would like to say thank you. I've taken a lot away from this personally, and I think from the feedback we've seen coming through on chat and Q&A, everybody that's been in attendance has very much seen that too. The slides will be available afterwards. We do always post these things, and it has been on YouTube as well for those not able, as Richard said, to access Zoom. Please do look Richard up online. If you Google Richard M. Marshall, you will find a lot of information about him and the analyst syndicate that he's currently working with, which sounds extremely interesting and want to follow up on as well. Richard, just from Scotland thank you so much, and we really look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, well, likewise. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Heather. And yeah, let's do it again soon, and all stay safe, stay home, look after yourselves.
Thank you very much.